My name is David Smith, and I am 30 years old.
Great. And what are you doing now to solve the world's problems, and how did you get here? Kind of what's your story and what's your life's work?
Well, ultimately, I am now the executive director of the National Conference on Citizenship. Before that, I founded and ran Mobilize.org. Both of these organizations work to try to build a more active and engaged citizenry. Mobilize focused more specifically on young people, on the millennial generation, and investing in millennial-led solutions. My personal story actually goes back to my time in college. I actually started college as a civil engineer and actually went for about 2.5 years. Actually was seven courses away from graduating with a civil engineering degree. And then a few things happened. One was the 2000 elections actually happened right in the midst of my exploration in trying to figure out what my role was as a citizen. And I realized, well, this is interesting. This is something that was important to me, and I wanted to get more involved. However, I had a midterm the next day, and when I talked to my engineering professors, they're like, well, that's a different side of campus. If you want to get involved in that sort of civic engagement, then go be a political science major or economics major. I was like, okay, fine, I won't do that. I'll focus on my mission here. And then a couple other things happened, which was I was working 3 jobs to try to pay my way through college, and I had to move 45 minutes away from campus to be able to afford housing. And I just wasn't getting the experience that I was promised going to the best public school in the country. Went to the University of California at Berkeley. And this became a problem for me because I was like, well, this isn't what I was promised, this is what I was told, this isn't really the experience that I'm looking for. So I got together with a handful of friends and we said, well, we need to step up and say something about it. So one of my friends luckily had a little bit of politics in his blood and sort of said, well, you know, we need to stand up, we need to go meet with our elected officials, we need to tell them that we need a change. And I said, okay, well, I can't, you know, if they raise student tuition one more time, I'm going to have to drop out of school just to be able to make enough money to stay and, you know, to go back to school. So I've got nothing to lose, I'll do it. So I organized a handful of friends. We went up, we met with our legislators in Sacramento, and we told them, you know, there is something that that's going on here that's just not okay. And so we told them our stories. We told them what it was like to be in our shoes. We told them why it was important to prioritize education, and ultimately why there was a lack of affordable housing, and why what would happen if they raised student tuition. And this became a very empowering experience because not only did they listen, but they actually changed things because of it. And that changed my life altogether.
Great. And
That's a very long story. I don't know.
No, that's very good. And what's some of the work that you're doing now? What did that lead into?
So what happened, and actually sort of building off of that, was called Cal Lobby Day, where we sort of went forward and we got 150 students to go up to Sacramento, and we resulted in about $130 million legislative victory. They turned and they said, you know what, we'll put a moratorium on student fees, saving $93 million out of the pockets of students all across the state. Additionally, they put money towards student housing, built another 500 beds around UC Berkeley for low-income students that wanted to be close to campus, and it was actually just a start of a program that was spread throughout the state of California. What we figured out, you know, in doing this was that it was easy. I mean, it wasn't really easy, but it was. It was about just a handful of students stepping up and saying, I can organize myself to go and talk to our elected officials, let them know what's going on in our lives, and have them make the right decisions with full information. They weren't receiving the information from our generation. They were receiving information from people who had high-paid lobbyists, had public interest groups, had all your private interest groups, and what they weren't hearing were the voice of citizens, especially not the voice of students or young people. So from that, we said, well, if 3 people can organize an event that ultimately has this sort of impact in one place, what could happen if our entire generation, 80 million strong, went out there and organized? And so what we did was we started sharing our story. So in the first year we went out and we did a march across America. It was basically a Road Rules meets the West Wing, sort of an RV tour across the country. We started hearing we were sharing our story and saying what was working in Berkeley, what was working in our communities. And what we started to realize was our story was not unique. These stories were happening all around the country of individuals who were rising up and trying to solve a local problem. And so by the end of our March Across America, 15 cities in 15 days and several thousand beautiful stories later, we realized that our generation wanted to lead. We wanted to solve problems. We wanted to roll up our sleeves, but in many cases we didn't have access to the resources or the opportunity. So Mobilize.org was born to really provide that sort of investment in this next generation of leaders. And so Mobilize expanded from a group of 10 students on one campus to over 30,000 activists around the country, and is growing more and more, both in terms of breadth as well as depth. And it's focusing on sort of how can we empower millennial leaders by giving them the tools, resources, and access to decision makers so that they don't just advocate and say, we have these problems, will you solve them for us? But they're saying, we have these problems, we have these solutions, we're implementing them, won't you join us in helping to solve this problem? I think that concept is really embodied in the Democracy 2.0 principles that we espouse.
Definitely. And this one is this next question is more self-evident for your cause than it is for other ones, but what are some ways you've worked across traditional boundaries to get things done?
Well, one of the big boundaries that we were seeing early on in sort of 2002 to 2004 and on into 2006 was really the partisan divide. And this was a major issue because we as an organization called ourselves all partisan. We didn't like the bipartisan word, we didn't like the nonpartisan word because we felt like either they were too, just focusing on the two extremes, or nonpartisan was sort of like, let's take that part of you, that identity that's part of you, and put it on that, take off that hat when you walk in the door. We were saying embrace that hat, but come and actually see how we can help solve problems together. And one of our most, I think, transformational experiences happened in what we call Mobilize 05, which was a retreat where we brought our 30 top organizers from around the country together. And going in, we knew that it was going to be a contentious bunch. I mean, we had 6 or 7 folks who were on the leadership of college Republicans, a handful of folks who were leaders in Rock to Vote, SEIU, and a lot of other progressive organizations. And when they came together, we were like, we need to keep these people apart. We need to make sure that they're sleeping in different places, eating in different places. And what we ended up flipping on its head is when we actually got everyone together, we said, why don't we put all this stuff aside and try to focus on one problem that we can solve? And we did it together. And as we started building that and spent the entire weekend, it was up in Santa Cruz, California, we sort of brought everyone together. We had this whole conversation. We built this sort of movement and this project together. And at the end of it, we had a campfire. And sitting around that campfire, I ended up having one of our COO at the time, who is now the CEO of Mobilize, sort of came over and tapped me on the shoulder, and she said, look around the fire right now. And I started looking around, and she goes, it worked. Every one of the conversations that we were trying to avoid, the student leading the Gay Rights Association out of the University of Arizona, and the guy who was a college Republican president at Auburn University, who were standing there and talking about not just random things. They were talking about, so tell me, I respect you, I like you, you are someone who who's now a friend of mine. Tell me what the deal is about this gay marriage issue, and vice versa. Why don't you want me and my my boyfriend to be able to be married? And these conversations became were just so powerful because it wasn't like we set people up and then forced them to talk about them. They came around after people built a mutual respect, mutual agreement that they had the ability to solve problems together, and the competency to do so. And then it came around as, well, I want to know who you are, and I want to know how I can help you and how you can help me, and we can break down these barriers.
Cool. That's amazing. What are some of the challenges that you see facing young people today?
I think a major challenge, one major challenge that will probably exist for several more decades is how the economic collapse and sort of economic recession is impacting our generation. We are feeling it in an unproportional amount of this is being sort of put on our backs, in the sense that we have 2 to 3, in some cases 4 times the national rate of unemployment is being pushed upon our generation, and specifically certain demographics within our generation, certain populations. And what that is showing is that for decades we're going to have people who are unemployed or underemployed at least, and then as they work their way into the workforce, they're going to be years behind their cohorts of previous generations. I think that's going to create a lot of problems in terms of income disparities and really how people can save and build towards a healthy lifestyle and healthy, and potential retirement at some point. I think that's a major, one of the major issues. I think it's going to underline a lot of other issues that from education to to a lot of economic issues. I personally, I focus on a lot of issues related to sort of how we're investing in the next generation, and how we're spending, sort of the broad government spending that's going on, from pensions in states to entitlements federally. And I think what we're seeing is that there really is going to be a huge stress put on our generation. And if we're not prepared to be able to deal with these problems, I think that there's some major red flags that are being shown that could really deconstruct our democracy and really deconstruct what America is all about. And I think that the more that we're able to build a rapport and a connection between citizens, and understanding that we don't need our government to solve every problem. We don't need our foundations or nonprofits to solve every problem. We don't need corporations to step up and try to solve every problem. What we need citizens to be at the lead, and then use these institutions in a way that really makes sense. And if we can focus on that, I think we'll be able to solve some of these major problems that may not even be here today, but we're going to really get burdened with in about 20 years.
And following up, what advice do you have for youth who want to get involved in the political process, or their communities, or youth mobilization? What do you tell them? I guess personal opinion, and also as as an expert on this.
Well, number one thing that we found in terms of how to mobilize young people, no matter what studies you put out there and what sort of data you collect, the number one reason why anyone does anything, from buying a product to voting to volunteering, is that someone asks them. So the first thing I would say to any young leaders is to turn and ask your peers to get involved. Second thing I would say is, for anyone who's sort of looking for a way to get involved but hasn't been asked yet, don't wait to be asked. Just step in there and actually try to identify what's one thing that you'd want to change in your community. And it doesn't need to be huge. I mean, it doesn't need to be a world peace or some sort of a national, a national issue such as, or global issue such as environment, or a national issue such as some sort of economic reforms or political reforms. It can be something so simple as, I don't like the way that people are treating someone in my community, or I don't like the way that the culture is being built around a specific part of my community, or where how people are able to engage or talk or hang out or really have the opportunity to connect as neighbors and as fellow people. And I think if you sort of step forward and help produce some solutions around that, what you're doing is you're embodying that bigger picture of what you want the world to ultimately look like. And I think that that's something that we can encourage in every young person, is sort of stepping forward. And it's the whole, from the cliche as Gandhi saying to be the change that you wish to see in the world, but it's true. It's about people stepping up and saying, or even the Margaret Mead quotes of, never doubt that a small group of citizens can change the world, because indeed it is the only thing that ever has. I mean, that's exactly, it becomes more and more true the more involved that you get, and the more you realize, okay, I need to step up, and I need to not wait for somebody else to turn to me and say, oh, well, you're a resource, you're someone who might have, some thoughts to bear. Step forward and say, I'm a young person, I'm speaking from a place of power, because no one else at this table knows what life is like in my shoes. And if I keep it to myself, it's my fault that your policies, that your decisions, that your laws don't embrace who I am. If I step forward and say, this is what life is like in my shoes, now everyone has the information. That information becomes their power to help solve the problems in partnership with you and your communities.